Hey, everybody. Super interesting cybersecurity chat today on Friday. Yes, it's Friday. And I'm really thrilled to have a true thought leader from Dynatrace on the session today, public sector CTO Willie Hicks. Willie, how are you?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. Really excited to pick your brain. Maybe introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and then your role at Dynatrace.
Okay. Well, again, great to be here, Evan. And I guess a little bit about me. Again, Willie Hicks, public sector chief technologist here at Dynatrace. And a little bit about me. I guess I started my journey at Dynatrace about 13 years ago. So I've been here for a little bit. I started off as a sales engineer. I was focused in on
Nice.
yeah, I started off really. I love the technology. I've been digging into it for years, and prior to that, actually, I spent about 17 years at a large regional bank down south. I don't think I mentioned I'm not from the DC region originally. I was from Alabama. So if I get a little bit of a southern accent that comes out, I'm
Bring it on.
I'm originally from there. And when I was at in the banking world, I was in the consulting space. I was focused really on always on IT, but it was in the financial sector and really on application performance, engineering, management. And it's funny, what brought me to Dynatrace is that although my time in the banking industry was really great, I loved the people, the teams that I worked with. It was really formative for me. I found myself really over the years moving kind of further and further away from the technology. So, I started off as, like I said, a consultant, and I did tier one support and tier two support and kind of worked my way up. But I also, at the same time, I was kind of going back to school and got my master's degree in electrical engineering. And then I started moving up the leadership ranks. And the further I moved up, the further away, at least in the banking side of the house, I moved away from the technology. So over the years, I kind of got, frustrated with that. I wanted to get more my hands back into the in the technology side of things. So I decided to one day I just picked up, moved to DC. That brought me to Dynatrace. And it's funny, I started off again as an engineer in the technology, moved my way up, but this time I'm actually not far away from the technology. It's really exciting that I get to speak with customers. I get to have shows like this and talk about technology, how observability is impacting our world, how things like zero trust is impacting us. So that's I guess a little bit about me and what brought me here.
Oh, wonderful story. Thanks for sharing. And give us a snapshot of the sort of current vision, mission of Dynatrace, a company that's been around for a while, but is really at the leading edge in a number of areas.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, our mission, our vision is, we are here to help our customers to make software run perfectly. I know that sounds kind of that sounds kind of really ambitious, and is anything actually perfect? But we work to help our customers really try to work towards that and achieve that, because what we've seen, and our founder and our corporate CTO saw early on, is that applications are really complex, and they
Mm.
are becoming ever and ever more complex. You've got the cloud, you've got containers, you've got microservices, you've got all of these intricate pieces that are being woven together, and at the same time customer expectations continue to grow. I mean, for good or for bad, you've got things like Amazon. I get packages on my doorstep like 2 or 3 times a day. And I always worry because it's so easy. My kids, they get online and they're in my wife's account or something. And I'm always like, did they buy something? Did they just click the wrong button? So it becomes super easy, super simple. So expectations are high, but you have these really complex systems. And I remember, like I said, I've been doing this for over 2 decades now. And
Mm.
I remember, when, my first online banking system was like 12 servers. and that was for all of the banking environment, and that was complex in itself. Now you've got hundreds of microservices that run one small little application, so that
Mm.
complexity is there. We help break down that complexity. We help make it super simple, and then we add artificial intelligence on top of that to really help augment customers' staffing so they can find problems faster.
Amazing. Well, I love that little flashback on this Friday. I remember when you were scared to use your credit card online. Remember, like, oh, can't use that. So
Well, I,
look how far we.
I hate to even go back further. I remember working in my dad's, helping my dad in his store years ago, and they had the manual card, like you put the card down,
Oh
and
my goodness.
you had the manual slider and do an imprint. That's yeah. I don't want to date myself though.
You have already. I'm sorry to say. But let's fast forward. You're in the DC area. You really have your hand on the pulse of what's happening with government agencies. So I really like to pick your brain about how the recent executive order around implementing zero trust is unfolding. What are the outcomes expected, and maybe describe the directive and what its goals are in terms of national cybersecurity.
Right. Okay. And this is a great topic, very very relevant topic. So what you have in with this EO, and I should say executive order, that's what an EO is. What the administration has put out is they have really kind of set forth a set of guidelines. And really what it comes down to is a directive from the president, from the administration to his cabinet agencies to implement really a more comprehensive, I'll just say like an enhanced approach to cybersecurity. And this is in response, and I'm sure this is no surprise to your audience, but this is really in response to the myriad of high profile attacks and vulnerabilities and issues that we have seen at the government level,
Mm.
but we've seen at the private sector level. So, I mean, you can rattle off the ones that we hear about, or like the things like, the Colonial Pipeline. A few years ago, you had this big Colonial Pipeline breach. You have, all the ransomware attacks, hospitals being hit. You hear about on the news like an agency or a hospital being shut down because all their systems are being held hostage by sometimes these could be a small little group of threat actors. It could be somebody in somebody's basement. It could be a
Mm.
government who's doing this. But you've heard of these attacks. You've also heard of the vulnerabilities in our systems that have exposed and allowed these attacks to happen, like the SolarWinds incident, Log4j. Those are the ones, and I want to emphasize those are the ones you hear about. There are a lot of things that people never actually even hear about that would also really worry and concern you. So in response to that, the administration put out this executive order. Because they recognized, and this is kudos to the administration, because they really recognize the kind of the evolving nature and the sophisticated nature of these cyber threats today. And the whole aim here was to kind of strengthen the nation's resiliency to these threats. And when I say the nation, it's this really impacts a lot of the government agencies, but this goes in the private sector too. So there has to be cooperation with the private sector. And I guess to kind of complete this a little bit, and I don't want to go into too much detail, I guess, to go too deep, but the EO, or the executive order, because I think you asked kind of what it outlines a little bit.
Hmm.
It outlines some real key elements. There are some key elements here. So there are things like continuous verification. There's security access controls. So you think about things like given least privilege access to things. You don't want to give too much privilege to things. Endpoint security. This is really important today because endpoints. When I talk about endpoints, you've got your computers, your desktops, all sorts of types of devices. Now you've got mobile devices. With COVID, which I hate to even bring up because it's still there with us a little bit, but we've got a lot of people went remote. There's still people remote in the government space. So you've got a lot of devices now that are outside of the government networks somewhat, and they're in homes. People working from coffee shops, whatever. So all of these kind of elements along with the network and so forth. They are part of this idea of zero trust. And I mentioned this earlier, but I also wanted to highlight that the executive order also emphasizes the importance of information sharing across the not just across the agencies, but with private sector as well. So we can we can better combat as a nation. We can better combat these threats. So that's kind of at a very high level what zero trust is, and I can get into this a little bit more. But people, when people hear zero trust, I think sometimes they think, because the name kind of implies it, trust no one. My company is no longer going to trust me. The agencies aren't going to trust me. I'm not a trusted employee anymore. That's not really what it means. I always like to think about it this way. It's not that Dynatrace doesn't trust me when I log in. They just should assume no trust in anything. The assumption of trust should just go away. And what should happen here is that when I get validated into the system, they have all these checks and balances to say, yeah, this is Willie. He's logged in. He's he's good to go. But whenever Willie does something else on the system and moves along the system laterally or goes into another system, I'm gonna trust nothing. I'm not gonna assume this is still Willie. I'm not going to assume this is who I thought it was, or the device that's trying to connect. So then that goes into kind of this idea of always, trust nothing, but always just constantly kind of re-verify. So again, this is again one of those key tenets, I guess, of zero trust. And that was kind of a lot. So let me take a step back.
No, it's a great sort of update for the viewers, and we actually had the inventor of the zero trust concept on the show a few weeks ago. So that was a fun lesson from him. But you did touch on private sector involvement, getting the federal government and the private sector more in sync on advancing best practices and zero trust standards. What does that mean as a private sector company like Dynatrace? What does that mean on the ground for you and the team?
So for me, that means several things. Obviously, where the government can share information both ways. Like when we have, and these are honestly these are things that should always be in place, but it becomes a little bit problematic. So when a company like Dynatrace or any company out there has an incident, we need to report that incident. We need to make sure that incident gets up to CISA, that's DHS, the cybersecurity. If I shouldn't use acronyms there, but that's the
bring them on. We have a pretty sophisticated audience, so 4 or 5 letter acronyms are welcome here.
Okay, that's fine. So the cybersecurity and infrastructure agency out there. So they that information should be shared both ways. But then it becomes a little bit problematic because also you want to be really careful about what you share. We're a private company, so how much we put out there, what we put out there, if we put it out too soon, and we haven't really vetted everything, that could impact us, from a company standpoint. It's the same thing for government agencies. So there is kind of a balance there, but there's this idea that we need to have more open means of communication, secure communication, where we can share this information and do it where we can feel like it's not going to also threaten our business. But also, I think that what this means too, and maybe this isn't written per se into the zero trust, the EO itself, and maybe the mindset, but for me and from a Dynatrace perspective, which I represent, I think that also means is that there needs to be more public-private partnership. So where we can help the government, where we can help agencies, and this is not just me, obviously I work for Dynatrace. I want to, sell more product to my customers, but I have a firm belief that it is our duty to support the places where we work, and it's not just in the U.S. I mean, these are governments globally where we should be able to support agencies, the government, and so forth. And observability is, in my humble opinion, but I would say in my expert opinion too, it is foundational to this idea of zero trust. It's actually kind of foundational to cybersecurity in a lot of respects. And that's not just coming from me. I have the opportunity to speak to CIOs, CTOs, agencies all the time. And this is something that we talk about quite frequently.
And why is that exactly when it comes to identifying and managing risk? I mean, why is observability so critical? I would agree with you, but explain some of the principles there.
So, so how observability supports, and I'm going to say why it's so critical, how it supports zero trust and so forth. And actually, this is something that we talked about recently. I was just on another podcast, our Tech Transforms podcast, and we talked about this very topic. So it's kind of top of mind for me. But observability is how do I say this? It really plays a crucial role in security and the zero trust model as a whole, because it provides agencies the necessary insight that they need and the necessary visibility. I use observability. This word has been co-opted quite a bit. I think, you can find all sorts of definitions for observability. Let me break it down a little bit simpler. It's visibility into your network, really deep visibility into your applications and into your network, your systems, your applications, your users, kind of tying all of that together. And this visibility, as it were, is essential for effectively implementing and maintaining this kind of idea of zero trust and cybersecurity as a whole, because zero trust is kind of based on, and we kind of talked about this, but it's also based on this idea of continuous monitoring. You need to always, because if you trust nothing, you're continuously watching the system, you're continuously monitoring the system, you're putting these strict access controls on systems and devices and users and non-human users, and you're assuming a breach. I think that's part of the problem too. In the past, is that we've had this, they call it the kind of the gate and moat kind of idea, where that back in you have this security perimeter we put around the network. We've got our firewalls, our WAFs, we got all of these devices. So once you get past the gate, you're good. And now we kind of go into this mindset where we have to assume a breach has happened, because the thing is, the firewalls and all might protect us 99.9% of the time, but it's just that one time, or that 1%, that 0.5%, that could be catastrophic. So you have to assume that 1% has happened and that we've been compromised. So so observability, though, kind of bringing it back, why I said earlier is foundational, is because it's going to give you, it's kind of that, it's a connective tissue between what is called kind of all the pillars of zero trust. And if you look at, there are different models out there when I say pillars. Like if you can Google CISA, zero trust, and you can see the 5 pillars of zero trust out there. You can go to DISA, which is the defense information systems. I think they have 7 pillars out there. But with all of these pillars, and especially with DISAs, because they actually call out visibility, it's actually literally called out as one of the pillars. But observability kind of really marries together all of these pillars. This concept is kind of a connective tissue, because it gives you that real-time monitoring, that continuous monitoring that you need. It is going to enable, network monitoring, user monitoring, system level monitoring. It's going to then, on top of that, and what's kind of key here is that your real observability platforms, and we haven't really talked about AI yet, but they're going to leverage things like AI, because what happens here, and as you can imagine, I talked about complexity in the beginning, but if you try to visualize now, just in your mind, try to visualize just one application that might span a local data center, then goes into a hyperscaler, into a cloud, then goes into all these little microservices that are running on containers, and then you got to get information back to your users, or even non-human devices, and all of this information is flowing back and forth. Prior to all, even like I go back, like I said, to my early days, we would get alerts on our systems all the time. And I would have to sort through 20, 30, 50 alerts in the morning.
Brutal.
That's back in the day. Now, we have I have customers that I work with. They're getting 20, 30 alerts, every minute or every second. I mean, you could talk about hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of alerts that are hitting from all of these different systems. So that's where, AI is really important to come in. And what AI is going to help you do is understand and normalize and find patterns in all of this noise. So it's going to help you find anomalous behavior in the system where I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not saying take humans out of the loop, because sometimes people think AI, they hear AI and they're like, I'm going to lose my job. That's not what we're talking about here. This is really about augmenting what we can't do as humans really well. Because I couldn't do this when I had 20 or 30 alerts 20 years ago. It was frustrating enough just going through in the morning, going through all these alerts and seeing what's real and what's not. If I have hundreds and thousands of alerts that are hitting me or hitting my teams at one time, it's nearly impossible to go through and make sense of that. So AI really comes in, it helps normalize this data, it helps find that anomalous behavior and really pop up, this is what you need to look at. All the other stuff is noise. And then when you get into, and this is critical in zero trust because you're always constantly be re-verifying. So you're constantly getting these alerts. So when that alert hits and it says, this is a real incident, now it is the security. This is where a human comes in and they've got to come in and say, okay, what's really going on here? How do I handle this incident? And first of all, I need to understand where's the source of the incident? Is this vulnerable code? Do I have an insider threat? Has someone externally, compromised the system? Or you also have to ask the question, like, I see this anomaly, CPU just spiked. I see traffic going from my database, and maybe someone's extracting a lot of data from my database, or a developer just put out some really bad code. They didn't test it, and it caused the CPU to spike, and the database is doing something erratic because they put in a bad piece of SQL code. So if you spent all your time as a security professional because you saw this anomaly and you were like, at the end of the day, it was just a developer who wrote a bad piece of code, you just waste your time. But what an AI can do and observability can do is say, this problem, no changes have been made to the system. This is not an issue that is application related. What we're seeing here looks like a true maybe security threat. This is where I need to focus my time. So these are some of the ways that observability can really enhance and I could say augment and help with these zero trust frameworks as you build them out. But also, I would say one final thought here is that there is this idea that we have to continuously improve. And I think that's been part of the problem. We become static. We think, and this is just human nature. Once the problem is gone, once we think, things will settle down, we move on to something else. We forget, that we had a problem like a week ago. I think with observability, it allows you to kind of keep focus on and continuously improve and adapt the system because, again, the AI doesn't get tired. The AI is, if you've got a really task-oriented AI that is focused on one really kind of, task, it is going to do that. And it's going to continue to do that 24/7. Doesn't get tired, doesn't care about weekends, doesn't care about vacations. And so you can go back to this data and see, what worked in the past, what didn't work in the past. Did the AI find really some bad code out there that needs to be fixed? Because that'll cut down on the noise in the system. Part of zero trust is, this idea of segmenting your network and protecting your network. AI can go out there and help you understand the network and say, this is kind of the logical place you need to break up your network. Those things are those continuous processes or things that I think, an observability platform is just critical for a zero trust standpoint. Again, that was a lot. Let me take a breath here.
Wow, man, you are on fire on this Friday. I think the world needs an AI powered Willie Hicks co-pilot, in cybersecurity. You can just power it up with a couple of cappuccinos and set it off in motion. I love it.
If I can get one for my kids, so I keep them in control.
No, you're brilliant. So you touched on identity a while back and the role
Mhm,
of identity verification in zero trust. Are you the real Willie Hicks versus
mhm,
an imposter? What is the best practice there? And you have all these devices now on the network. I mean, when we started working, we had a laptop, and then when it was a big deal to add your phone to the network, and of course we saw what Obama had to go through with his BlackBerry and Trump with his tweeting and his iPhone, and
mhm, mhm.
it's so much more complex now with the Internet of Things and all kinds of new devices. What's the strategy there with zero trust around securing all these devices and so much sensitive information and content?
Right. Well, I think so. So with identity management, I can tie kind of these together with identity and kind of device management there. And just for the audience sake here, and I don't think anybody would assume this, but I want to go back to this idea that zero trust is really, it's an architecture, it's a framework. It's
Mm,
and it helps you really put some uh, process and logic and architecture around what we're trying to do here. And identity management, device management, these are just kind of parts of it. And you don't just buy like a piece of software and put it in all your zero trust. So you've got identity management software out there and kind of the best practice. And what I say for all of these pieces, because, from an observability standpoint, there are companies out there like Dynatrace who focus, and that's our sole focus is observability. But then you've got like really strong identity management companies out there.
mm,
You've got device management companies out there. You're going to have all of these pieces that work together. And since I work in the public sector, I think maybe I have maybe a different lens on this. But in the public sector, agencies really depend on integrators. They depend on partners who can come in and help. With kind of designing these networks and so forth. And I would say, for what I always advise my agency partners out there, is just to have really good relationships with the different partners in these spaces. Like for identity management, I think one of the key things is, you know, as when you're building out your framework, understanding what you need to put in place. I believe in like iterative processes, because sometimes you
mm,
can try to overthink things, and I got to figure out my identity management, plan completely, and my device management plan completely before I iterate and do anything. But one of my one colleague I have, and the person I've worked with, he is there's a guy, Jamie Holcomb. He works at USPTO. He's the CIO over there, and he said this to me once before on another conversation, that he believes in almost an agile kind of method of implementing these types of projects, like zero trust, where you get into an iterative phase. Like identity management is about, get a plan out there and just do it. Get a
mm,
solid plan out there, get your identity management in place, and then start observing and seeing how's it performing. How are and then iterate and see, okay, this is not really working. We're still getting, we're still having problems with usability of the system, or it's
mm,
not giving the data back. And so you just kind of iterate through. And I think that's part of the problem, is that some people really try to overthink this, even with device management, trying to find the right piece of software, the right device management software and so forth. And I think it's really just a process of designing it well, but then iterating through and making sure you've got kind of a process to continue to improve. And it's the same thing with observability. I mean, I put myself in the same vein. You really need to get out there, start with a small application, see how it works, and then iterate and make it better and expand it to more and more. And I think that might even speak to, I don't want to kind of jump ahead here, but that might speak to this idea too of, and I don't think we even talked about this, kind of the timelines for zero trust, because I didn't mention this, I don't think, in the beginning, but the executive order actually is calling for this to be done and completed by fiscal 24, the government fiscal year 24. So that's
oh
like
wow.
September, coming up in September, which is not a long ways off. And so, the question I often think about is that, can agencies really do this? Can agencies really
Mm,
put in place and meet the executive's mandates to have kind of these architectures put in place, by September, by the fiscal. And I think the only way they can do that, and just this is my humble opinion here. I'm not speaking for this is even outside of Dynatrace, and all respect to all of my government colleagues out there. I think private sector would be hard pressed to make like you think of a large company like say Amazon or something, to make that kind of massive change in just a few more months. That would be kind of hard pressed. So I think what makes more sense is taking, and what I think we're going to see is like your most critical applications. You're going to see the most critical what we call like the high impact services in the network, in the government's network. You're going to see probably those most critical systems, the most critical infrastructure. Those are going to be attacked first. I mean, I shouldn't say attacked. Those are going to be the ones that we implement first. And my hope is that they're taking that approach where they're putting things in place, and now they're iterating through to see what's working, what's not, what's broken, and so they can get to September where they've at least gotten the most critical infrastructure, the most critical high impact services, and then we're just going to have to come back and clean up and fix or complete the rest of this over time, because it's a process that never ends. You have to realize security. It's not like we're done, like we implement this and it's done. So it's going to be something that's continuous, because those threat actors don't stop. As soon as you put something in place, they're trying to find ways around it and to compromise the systems again. So it is a continuous process. So I think that if agencies can get into that, like you were saying with device management, the same thing with network and so data, all of these things, I think that we need to take these kind of iterative processes, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. What about some of the softer impacts, perhaps, of the executive order? Things like awareness, education, some areas sorely lacking. Maybe incident response, preparedness. How optimistic are you about change there this year?
I am optimistic that we're going to get we're going to get a lot of the key pieces in place. I'm not again, this is going to be something that still takes more time, because I go back to the fact that this, especially things like you were talking about, like the response side of this, and how we handle kind of what I was talking about with the public-private side of this too. There are other, I'm going to say there are other ancillary pieces of this that we haven't even talked about. Like if you look at zero trust, kind of from the private sector side, there are other pieces that are being put in place to talk about national security as a whole. So, for example, industry, I can speak to this kind of openly, but because this is public knowledge. But there are things around supply chain that needs to be addressed, like how agencies and private industries handle their supply chains and how they report their supply chains. SBOMs, which are bill of materials. How do we need to provide our agency partners and even other companies a software bill of materials of how the software is made? I bring these two up especially because you asked, will we be here in September? These are really big topics, because what you're asking is private sector, private industry, which and don't get me wrong, this is super important. That they're asking the question simply like, who is manufacturing your software? Because today, one person does not write a piece of code. You have like for Dynatrace, we have teams and teams and teams of people who work on all sorts of different parts of our platform. And for large global companies, you could have developers everywhere. You can have developers in the US, but they're often in other countries out. Some of them are outsourced, but sometimes they're your own employees, but you have offices in different countries and so forth. So the supply chain, and this is what happened with things like you look at things like SolarWinds and all, these threat actors are looking for the weakest link. If you've got the supply chain and they can find like a very weak link, lay down in your supply chain where nobody's looking at, that's where they're going to attack. And then with that, they're going to maybe implement a little piece of malicious code or be able to infiltrate and then work their way back up the chain. That's why, things like better understanding and controlling the supply chain, having a software bill of materials, because what that means is, products like Dynatrace, or products like even products you might buy off the shelf for your word processing and so forth. There are hundreds or thousands of pieces of little widgets, code. You can call them open. A lot of times it's open source, but they're modules that might have been written by other people that might be implemented in the code you're using. And so when there is an attack, when there is a vulnerability that comes out, and this happened with Log4j, the agency needs to know quickly, what is this code made of? I purchased this software. I need to know every piece that's in here, because I need to see if that vulnerable code is there. And if so, what is the scope of it? What is my blast radius? How much am I going to, how much damage has this done to my environment? And that we learned that with Log4j, that is really difficult to do if you don't know where that code is and you're scanning and you're looking all of this manually. So going back to your original question, there's a lot that, like our company, we're looking, and we're actively working towards, how we're going to handle SBOMs, how we're going to deliver that, how we can deliver it safely. Because also when you're doing that, you're also opening up, this is literally everything our code is made of. So we don't want our competitors to get access to that as well. So there are all these questions that have to be answered. So could that be done by September? I would say we'd be hard pressed, but I think that's something that is critical and something we're working towards, if that helps.
It does. And, so many questions, so little time, but so many insights. And I really appreciate everything you've shared. So we're smack dab in the start of 2024. What are you looking forward to? Any business trips, travel, events coming up you want to call out?
Well, I'm looking forward to our upcoming Perform, which is this is our global users conference, and so you can.
Oh wow!
That's always. I'll be heading out. It'll be in Vegas. I personally am not a big Vegas fan, but
how many trips to Vegas can one take in 1 year? Let's see.
Yeah, so I'll be out there for our global performance. Also, we've got. I think we're going to have some mini events around that. Personally for me, also, up in a few months, I'll be heading out to some of our. Speaking of development shops, so we have development in Lens and some other places. So I'll be visiting there, taking doing some trips out there. So those are some upcoming. Outside of that, just personally, I've got to, figure out. We got to get some vacation for our kids. I've got a 5 and a 7-year-old. So
oh, wonderful.
They don't know Disney's a real place yet. They think it's a TV show. So
just wait. They'll figure it out. And when they do, you're in trouble. But thanks so much for the chat and all the insight and time that you shared. And everyone, thanks for watching. Reach out to Dynatrace with questions. They're all over social media with great content and analysis and insights. Take care, Willie. Have a great week. Have a great weekend.
You too. Take care of yourself.
All right. Thanks, everyone.